Eleanor Zelliot, a noted scholar of Ambedkar's writings and Dalit literature, says,
1913-1916 were Columbia's glory days. It was the most distinguished center of learning, I think, in America. He studied with many distinguished teachers. Perhaps the most famous is John Dewey, America's best-known educator. Pragmatic, in love with democracy, a world traveler, Ambedkar remembered John Dewey all his life, and at the end of his life, used to imitate his teaching style. He even quoted Dewey. Dewey said, every society gets encumbered with what is trivial, with deadwood from the past, with what is perverse. Society must not conserve everything, but only the things that make for a better future. And that was Dr. Ambedkar's philosophy. He studied with Edwin Seligman, a very distinguished economist and a very kind man. And what did he get in America? What did he learn from being in New York? I think he learned to have faith in democracy. New York was growing, New York was exciting, New York was dangerous. New York had Italians and Irish, and the American Negro, as it was called then, was coming up into this area. Ambedkar saw many, many peoples living together and a democracy that worked. Not only was he taught that by John Dewey, but I think he could see it in the structure of New York itself, a faith in democracy that never left him. I think he learned about race here. I think he could see that the black people, the Negro people, as they were called at that time, the people of color, were separate, had a separate church. The Abyssinian Baptist Church, a pure black church, is very near here. And he alone, of all the untouchable leaders, said, we are not a separate race. We are not a separate race. We must be treated distinctly in order to join all other Indians. And I think that fear of being thought to be permanently separate may have come from his New York experience.
Professor Ainsley T. Embry, Columbia University, an Indologist of repute, says,
when Ambedkar came to Columbia in the years before the First World War, the dominant intellectual influence here was represented by John Dewey. John Dewey's ideas in education were extraordinarily influential. He regarded education as basically concerned with creating democracy. He was very strongly against the old idea of education as perpetuating tradition. He was convinced that what had gone wrong with Europe was an emphasis on transmitting the past. And his argument was that we should give to children only what will be useful to them, only what will help them lead better lives. So to him, education and democracy were inseparable. Now, along with this was an enormous emphasis on equality. This again is part of the dominant ideas of the United States in those years. There was a great deal of anti-European feeling. And it's interesting, some of Ambedkar's early writings, his academic writings.
In 1915, Ambedkar was awarded a master's degree for his thesis, Ancient Indian Commerce. His paper, Castes in India, was acknowledged as the first scientific analysis of the barbaric social structure in India. The first salvo in a terrible war he waged throughout his life. Soon after this, he was awarded the Doctor of Philosophy degree for his thesis, The Evolution of Provincial Finance in British India. From USA to the London School of Economics for advanced studies, and also putting in terms at Gray's Inn for law. But his scholarship remuneration had run out. Despite his death, Ambedkar go back at Baroda State on the insistence of the Ambedkar had his first whiff of how even a superior officer if he is an untouchable, is treated by the lowliest a sepoy. This learned man, who had earned a doctorate from an American university, could not secure decent accommodation. Thrown out of hotels and even from a Parsi guest house. So humiliating was it out by the high caste staff official of the state that Ambedkar returned to Bombay disgusted. And thus ordained Manu, untouchable, howsoever and venerated he is in stature than the lowest of the caste Hindus, men, women, and infants. A brief stint as a lecturer at Bombay's Sydenham College, and then this unusual young man of learning who had launched a crusade against the system of caste, attracted the attention of Shahu Maharaj of Kolhapur, himself a reformist prince who worked hard to break the hold of Brahmin priests on society and emancipate the downtrodden. It was at this juncture in 1920 that Dr. Ambedkar, under the patronage of Shahu Maharaj, launched a fortnightly to articulate the anguish of his depressed community. The journal was appropriately titled Mookanayak, the Dumb Hero. After all, Dr. Ambedkar was the greatest follower of Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, that outstanding man who championed the cause of women and the depressed in the 19th century. Soon, the prince offered him a scholarship to complete his discontinued studies in London, and Dr. Ambedkar set sail for England in July 1920. While resuming terms at the London School of Economics and Gray's Inn, Ambedkar turned his full attention to general reading, giving a free rein to his avarice for knowledge and books. The British Museum Library, the famous repository of knowledge for centuries, to which many a great man of learning had made a pilgrimage seeking enlightenment, was Dr. Ambedkar's favorite haunt. Ambedkar virtually starved himself to buy books. In case, his funds did not amount to much, £8 a month. He lived frugally, hardly spending anything on clothes or transport. He often trudged on foot to different libraries to save money. He completed 2 theses for the London University: Imperial Finance in the Provinces of British India and The Problem of the Rupee. In London, Dr. Ambedkar simultaneously put in terms at the famous Gray's Inn. A man of versatile intellect, Dr. Ambedkar, even as he completed his thesis at the university, was called at the bar, the highest honor any person of his background had achieved till then. And although fully immersed in this academic pursuit, Dr. Ambedkar never for a moment could forget his people back at home. The inhuman plight of the untouchables was his unending obsession, and he frequently wrote to his wife asking anxious queries. Dear Ramu, I am writing this letter from a distance of 3,000 miles. I know my absence has thrown a very large responsibility on you, but I am sure you will bear it with fortitude. Be sure that our children study hard. Ambedkar returned home in April 1923 before the degree of Doctor of Science was awarded to him. A great reception awaited the young man. From then on, while practicing law in the Bombay High Court, he plunged headlong into his life's mission to uplift the untouchables, to educate them. To achieve these goals, his first organizational attempt was the establishment of the Bahishkrita Hitkarani Sabha, an organization for the welfare of outcasts. The first major battle was over the Savdar water tank at Mahad in Kolaba district, an obscure place. That was a pioneering struggle which rocked the foundations of the caste-ridden society and blazed a trail in the social history of India. The beautiful freshwater tank, right in the midst of the town, was open to all. Savarna Hindus, Christians, Muslims, Europeans, cattle, dogs and birds could freely draw water from this tank, except the untouchables, the Shudras, the low-caste Hindus, who worshipped the same gods as the Savarna Hindus did. By a Bombay Legislative Council resolution of 1923, the tanks should be open to all. But it was not so. A conference of untouchables was held at Mahad on 18th and 20th March 1927, which heralded the beginning of the struggle.